The recording app on my phone was still running when my wife Melissa burst through the front door of my Vermont cabin, dragging 2 massive suitcases behind her. "Alan, honey, we need to talk about your living situation up here," she announced, not even bothering to knock. "I've been worried sick about you being all alone in these mountains. My name is Alan Pierce. I'm 62 years old and I've been living in this mountain cabin for the past 3 years since I sold my construction company for $2.1 million. 35 years of building houses, starting with just me and a beat-up pickup truck, ending with 50 employees and more work than we could handle. Now I spend my days fishing the local streams and reading in my workshop, or at least that's what I thought I'd be doing." Melissa stood there in my living room, her eyes already scanning the place like a real estate agent sizing up a property. She's 57, my wife of 20 years, and until about 6 months ago, I thought we had a solid marriage. She used to be in real estate before she decided being my wife was a full-time job. What I didn't know back then was that she'd been studying me like a construction blueprint, looking for weak spots. "The isolation isn't good for you," she continued, wheeling those suitcases toward the guest bedroom without asking. "I think it's time we moved in together, full-time. So I can keep an eye on you, keep an eye on me." That phrase had been coming up a lot lately in our conversations, along with words like forgetful and confused, and maybe you should see someone about that. Funny thing is, my memory's sharp as the day I started my first construction job. I can still quote every building code in Vermont and remember the exact cost of materials from jobs I did 20 years ago, but Melissa had been planting seeds. Little comments here and there. "Did you forget we talked about this?" when I was pretty sure we hadn't. "You seem a bit mixed up today when I felt perfectly clear. Maybe you should write things down when I'd never needed to before." Looking back now, I can see it started right after I sold the company. At first, I thought it was just normal concern for a new retiree. She'd ask about my daily routine, my plans, my financial decisions. "Are you sure you want to spend that much on the cabin?" she'd said when I bought this place. "Maybe we should discuss these big purchases together." The thing is, I'd already been discussing everything with her for 20 years. We'd always made decisions together, shared everything. But something changed after the money came in. Her questions got more frequent, more pointed. She started suggesting I might need help managing my finances. "You're getting older, honey," she'd say with that concerned look. "These things become harder to keep track of. I was 59 when I retired. Hardly ancient." The real wake-up call came 2 months ago. I was having coffee at Murphy's Diner in town when my old friend Leonard Davis, who's a notary, pulled me aside. "Alan," he said quietly, "I had a strange visit yesterday. Your wife came by asking questions about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. Said she was asking for a friend, but she seemed mighty interested in the details. Leonard's been doing notary work for 30 years. He knows when someone's fishing for information they shouldn't need. That conversation stuck with me, so I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I noticed Melissa had been making phone calls when she thought I wasn't around. Quick, hushed conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. I noticed she'd been asking my neighbors questions. "How does Alan seem to you lately? Has he been acting different?" Mrs. Johnson from down the road mentioned it to me. "Your wife seems real concerned about you, Alan. Asked me if I'd noticed you being forgetful or confused. I told her you seem sharp as ever to me, and then there were the doctor visits. Melissa had been calling my physician, Dr. Stanley Miller, asking about signs of dementia and when families should be concerned. Doc Miller mentioned it to me during my last checkup, thinking it was sweet that my wife was so concerned about my health. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. She called 3 times last month, Doc Miller said, asking about memory tests, cognitive assessments. Said you'd been having episodes. I'd never had any episodes. My mind was as clear as it had ever been. I started thinking back over our 20-year marriage, looking for signs I'd missed. Melissa had always been good with money, handled our finances, made suggestions about investments. I'd trusted her completely, maybe too completely. She'd met me when I was 42, a widower with a young daughter named Linda. My first wife had died in a car accident, and I was struggling to raise Linda alone while building my business. Melissa seemed like a godsend. She was charming, helpful, great with Linda. She made our house feel like a home again. But now I was remembering things differently. How quickly she'd taken over our household finances. How she'd gradually convinced me to put everything in joint accounts for simplicity. How she'd suggested I didn't need to involve Linda in discussions about my will or estate planning. "It's between us, honey," she'd say. Family money should stay in the immediate family. Linda was my family, my daughter from my first marriage. But somehow, over the years, Melissa had made it seem like Linda was an outsider, someone who might complicate our financial planning. I thought about the construction business I'd built from nothing. Started with a $500 loan and a used truck. Worked 70-hour weeks for decades, rain or shine, learning every trade, building relationships with suppliers and customers. By the time I sold, we had crews working on projects all over central Vermont, houses, commercial buildings, renovations. We had a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. The $2.1 million sale price represented 35 years of my life. Every early morning, every aching back, every difficult customer, every satisfied homeowner. It was supposed to be my security, my legacy, my peace of mind in retirement. So when Melissa showed up unannounced with her suitcases, ready to keep an eye on me, I was ready for her. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "Let me help you with those bags." What Melissa didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. See, when you spend 35 years in construction, you learn a thing or two about surveillance and security. I'd installed cameras throughout the cabin. Not obvious ones, but small, professional-grade units tucked into corners and behind picture frames. The kind we used to use on construction sites to prevent theft. I'd also been working with Howard Thompson, an elder law attorney I'd found through my old business network. Smart guy, specializes in protecting seniors from exactly the kind of thing I suspected Melissa was planning. The first thing I did after Leonard's warning was call my daughter Linda. She's 38 now, married to Kenneth Garcia, an insurance adjuster. They live about an hour away in Burlington. Linda and I had grown distant over the years, and I realized now that Melissa had been quietly encouraging that distance. "Dad," Linda sounded surprised when I called. "Is everything okay?" "I hope so," I said, "but I need to ask you something. Has Melissa ever talked to you about my health? About me maybe needing help managing things?" There was a long pause. "Actually, yes, she called me about a month ago. Said she was worried about you living alone, that you'd been forgetting conversations, making questionable financial decisions. She asked if Kenneth and I had noticed anything. My blood ran cold. What did you tell her?" "I told her you seemed fine to me, but that we don't see you very often anymore." Linda's voice got smaller. "Dad, is something wrong? Are you having problems?" "The only problem I'm having is that your stepmother seems to think I am." I explained everything to Linda. Leonard's warning, the doctor calls, the subtle comments about my mental state. Linda listened without interrupting. "That's terrifying," she said finally. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to document everything, and I'm going to need your help." The next step was hiring Diane Roberts, a private investigator Leonard recommended. Diane had spent 20 years with the Vermont State Police before going private. She specialized in elder fraud cases. "This is more common than you'd think," Diane told me when we met at a coffee shop in Montpelier. "Spouses, children, caregivers. They see an aging person with assets, and they start making plans. The key is building a solid case before they make their move." Diane's investigation started with Melissa's background. What we found was disturbing. Melissa's real estate career hadn't just ended, it had been terminated. In 2015, an elderly client named Barbara Wilson had filed a formal complaint against Melissa with the Vermont Real Estate Commission. Barbara was 72 at the time, a widow looking to downsize from her family home. Melissa told me the house needed tens of thousands in repairs. Barbara explained when Diane contacted her. Foundation problems, electrical issues, a roof that was about to cave in. She showed me estimates from contractors said I'd be lucky to get $200,000 for the place. She had a buyer ready to take it off my hands quickly. The house was actually worth $350,000. Barbara's son got suspicious and hired an independent inspector who found only minor issues. The contractor estimates Melissa had shown were fabricated. She was going to steal $150,000 from me, Barbara said. If my son hadn't intervened, I would have lost everything. The real estate company had settled quietly with Barbara to avoid publicity, but they'd terminated Melissa immediately. The state commission had opened an investigation, but Melissa had already left the industry. This was the woman I'd been married to for 20 years. The woman who'd helped raise my daughter. The woman I'd trusted with my life savings. Diane also found the psychiatrist visits. Over the past 4 months, Melissa had consulted with 3 different doctors in the Burlington area. Dr. Patricia Wells, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, and Dr. Sarah Chen. All specialists in geriatric psychiatry. She told each of them the same story, Diane reported. Elderly husband showing signs of cognitive decline, memory problems, poor judgment with finances, episodes of confusion. She wanted to know about the process for having someone evaluated, what kind of documentation would be needed for a guardianship petition. My hands were shaking as I reviewed Diane's report. Melissa had been planning this for months, maybe longer. The worst part was the internet search history Diane had pulled from our home computer. Searches going back 6 months. How to have someone declared mentally incompetent in Vermont guardianship laws for elderly spouses. How long does guardianship process take? Can wife become guardian without consent? Signs of dementia in 60-year-old men she'd been researching, studying, planning to steal my life. Howard Thompson reviewed everything Diane had found. This is a clear pattern of predatory behavior, he said. But we need to catch her in the act. We need documentation of her actually attempting the fraud. That's when I made the decision to wire the cabin for sound and video. I called in favors from my old construction crew. Jimmy Martinez, who'd been my electrical foreman for 15 years, came up on a weekend to install the system. "You sure about this, boss?" Jimmy asked, as he ran cables behind the walls. "This is some serious stuff, I'm sure," I said. And Jimmy, not a word to anyone, not even your wife. The cameras were tiny, hidden in smoke detectors and behind picture frames. The audio system recorded everything: phones, conversations, even whispered discussions. Vermont is a one-party consent state, which meant as long as I was aware of the recording, it was completely legal. I also started carrying my phone everywhere, with a recording app ready to go. Every conversation with Melissa was documented. The final piece was setting up my legal protection. Howard helped me draft a new will that couldn't be easily challenged. We also prepared powers of attorney and advanced directives that clearly stated my mental competency and my wishes. "If she tries to have you declared incompetent," Howard explained, "we'll have overwhelming evidence that you were thinking clearly when you made these decisions." 2 weeks after I'd finished preparing my defenses, Melissa showed up with her suitcases. She thought she was moving in with a confused, vulnerable old man. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. "I think you'll be very comfortable here," I told Melissa as she settled into the guest room. "Make yourself at home." And that's exactly what she did. Over the next 5 days, I watched Melissa work and I recorded every minute of it. She started by going through my mail, bills, bank statements, anything with financial information. I caught her on camera photographing documents with her phone while I was supposedly napping in my recliner. She was building a file, creating evidence of my financial mismanagement and confusion about money. The first phone call came on day 2. I was in my workshop, but the audio system picked up everything from the kitchen landline. "Yes, this is Mrs. Pierce," Melissa said. "I'm calling about my husband, Alan. I'm very concerned about his mental state. Yes, he's been having episodes, forgetting important conversations, making poor financial decisions. Just yesterday, he couldn't remember talking to the bank about our account. I'd never called any bank. Our accounts were separate, always had been. I think he needs a professional evaluation." Melissa continued. "What's the process for having someone assessed? I see. And if the evaluation shows cognitive decline, what are the legal options for the family?" She made 3 more calls that day. Different doctors, all asking the same questions, building her paper trail. On the 3rd day, she drove into town and came back with a stack of forms. Guardianship paperwork from the Rutland County Courthouse. That evening, after what she thought was a particularly convincing display of my confusion about what day it was, she tried to get me to sign them. "It's just some insurance paperwork, honey," she said, sliding the documents across my kitchen table. "Nothing important." "The agent said you need to update your beneficiaries." I looked at the forms carefully. They weren't insurance papers. They were legal documents that would give Melissa complete control over my medical decisions and finances if I was declared mentally incompetent. Emergency guardianship papers that could be filed immediately. "Let me read through these first," I said. "You know how I like to understand what I'm signing?" Her smile got a little tight around the edges. "Oh, Alan, it's really just routine stuff. Your eyes aren't what they used to be. I can explain everything." My eyes were fine, but I pretended to squint at the papers, playing up the confused old man act. "Yeah, you're probably right, but humor me. I'll look them over tonight." "There's really no need," Melissa pressed. "The agent is coming by tomorrow morning. It would be so much easier if we had everything ready tomorrow morning." "You didn't mention any agent coming by. Did I forget to tell you?" She looked concerned. "See, honey, this is exactly what I'm worried about. You're forgetting more and more conversations lately." I wasn't forgetting anything, but I nodded slowly, playing the part. "Maybe you're right. My mind does feel a bit foggy lately." Her eyes lit up. "Exactly. That's why we need to get these papers in order while you're still able to make decisions." That night, I called Howard Thompson. "She's made her move," I told him. "Got the guardianship papers and everything, trying to get me to sign them under false pretenses." "Good," Howard said. "Now we have something concrete to work with." "How's the evidence gathering going? Better than I hoped?" "I've got her on camera going through my financial documents, recorded phone calls where she's lying about my mental state to doctors, and now attempted fraud with these fake insurance papers." "Excellent. In Vermont, that's attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. It's a felony, but we need more." "Any history of this kind of behavior?" "Actually, yes." I told Howard about Barbara Wilson and the real estate fraud from 2015. "Perfect. That establishes a pattern, but I want to catch her red-handed with the guardianship fraud." Can you stall her for a few more days? The next morning, there was no insurance agent. Of course there wasn't. Melissa seemed flustered when I asked about it. Oh, he had to reschedule, she said quickly. These agents, you know how busy they are. What was his name again? I asked. I want to look up his credentials online. His name. Oh, Johnson, Bill Johnson. But Alan, you really don't need to worry about those details, so that's why I'm here to help you. There was no Bill Johnson. I'd already checked. Over the next 2 days, Melissa's behavior became more desperate. She made more phone calls, this time to lawyers. I heard her asking about emergency procedures and expedited guardianship for urgent cases. She also called Linda. Hi, sweetie. Melissa's voice was sugary sweet on the recording. I wanted to update you about your father. Well, I'm staying with him now, and I have to say I'm very worried. He's been having real problems with his memory. Just this morning, he couldn't remember our conversation about the insurance papers. No, he seems to think they were something else entirely. Got quite agitated about it. I could hear Linda's voice faintly through the phone. Are you sure? He seemed fine when I talked to him last week. Oh, honey, he's very good at covering it up. Pride, you know? Men his age don't like to admit they're struggling. But between you and me, I think we need to start making some difficult decisions about his care. What kind of decisions? Legal ones. Making sure his finances are protected, that someone can make medical decisions if needed. I hate to burden you with this, but as his wife, I feel responsible. The manipulation was breathtaking. Melissa was positioning herself as the concerned spouse while painting me as a declining old man too proud to admit his problems. But she'd made a mistake. Linda knew about the recording plan. We'd coordinated everything. That's terrible, Linda said, playing along perfectly. What can I do to help? Well, there are some papers he needs to sign, legal protections, but he's been resistant, confused about what they are. Maybe if you talk to him, convinced him it's for his own good. Of course, I'll drive up this weekend. After Melissa hung up, I heard her on the phone again immediately. Howard, it's Melissa Pierce about those guardianship papers we discussed. Yes, I think we need to move quickly. His daughter is coming this weekend, and I'd like to have everything filed before then. What's the fastest we can get a court date? Howard? She was talking to a lawyer named Howard. For a moment, my blood chilled. Could she be talking to Howard Thompson? But then I realized she had to have found her own attorney. She was planning to file the papers immediately after I signed them. The trap was closing. But this time, Melissa was the one walking into it. That Friday afternoon, I decided it was time to spring my trap. Melissa, I said over lunch, I've been thinking about those papers you wanted me to sign. I'm still a little confused about some of the legal language. Maybe we should have a lawyer look at them before I sign anything. She nearly choked on her sandwich. Oh, that's not necessary. Like I said, it's just routine insurance stuff still. I'd feel better having my attorney take a look. Howard Thompson. You remember Howard, don't you? The color drained from her face. She remembered Howard all right. He'd been at our wedding 20 years ago, handled the legal work when I bought this cabin. Why don't I give him a call? I continued, reaching for my phone. Maybe he can come up here this afternoon and explain things to us. Alan, really? That's not. But I was already dialing. Howard, it's Alan. My wife has some legal documents she'd like you to review. Can you drive up to the cabin this afternoon? Great. And Howard, you might want to bring that investigator we discussed. And Leonard too, in case we need anything notarized. I hung up and smiled at Melissa. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her coffee cup. Alan, she said carefully, maybe we should talk about this privately first, before involving lawyers and other people. Oh, I think it's time we had everything out in the open, I said. Don't you? 3 hours later, Howard arrived with Diane Roberts and Leonard Davis. Melissa had tried to leave twice, claiming she had errands to run in town, but I insisted she stay. After all, I said, these are your papers. You should be here to explain them. We gathered in my living room. Howard spread the guardianship documents on my coffee table alongside printed screenshots from my security cameras and transcripts of Melissa's recorded phone calls. Mrs. Pierce, Howard began, his voice formal and professional. We need to discuss these guardianship papers you asked your husband to sign. Are you aware that they would give you complete legal control over his medical care and finances? Melissa's jaw tightened. I was just trying to protect him. Alan's been confused lately. Making poor decisions, such as? Howard asked. Well, he forgets things. Important conversations. He's not managing his money well. Diane Roberts opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Pierce, we've been investigating your background. We found some interesting information about your time as a real estate agent. She placed a photograph on the table. It showed Melissa outside Dr. Patricia Wells' medical office building. This was taken 6 weeks ago. You visited 3 different psychiatrists over the past 4 months, asking each of them about the process for having an elderly family member evaluated for dementia. I was concerned. You told each doctor that your husband was showing signs of significant cognitive decline, memory problems, confusion, poor judgment with finances. You were building a paper trail to support a guardianship claim. Howard leaned forward, Mrs. Pierce in Vermont, attempting to have someone declared incompetent when you know they're mentally sound is considered exploitation of a vulnerable adult. It's a Class D felony. Melissa stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm his wife. I have every right to be concerned about his well-being. You also contacted his physician multiple times, Diane continued, asking about signs of dementia and suggesting Dr. Miller should recommend a mental competency evaluation. You researched guardianship laws online extensively, and you told your husband these papers were insurance documents when they were actually legal guardianship forms. And then there's Barbara Wilson, Howard added. Melissa went very still. Ms. Wilson is 80 years old now, living in Burlington. She remembers you quite well from 2015. She's willing to testify about how you tried to manipulate her into selling her house for $150,000 below market value. That was a misunderstanding, Melissa said quickly. Was it? Because we also found records of your consultation with attorney Vincent Shaw about expedited guardianship procedures. Quite a coincidence that you were researching emergency legal processes while simultaneously trying to convince your husband he was mentally incompetent. I watched Melissa's face cycle through emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally something cold and calculating. She was looking for an escape route. And finally I said, standing up and walking to my entertainment center, there's this. I turned on my TV and started playing footage from my security cameras. Melissa going through my desk drawers. Melissa photographing my bank statements with her phone. Melissa on the phone saying, yes, he's definitely showing signs. Forgetting conversations, making poor decisions about money. I'm really worried about his ability to live independently. The audio was crystal clear. Her voice, her lies, her manipulation, all documented. Vermont is a one-party consent state, Howard explained. Mr. Pierce had every right to record conversations in his own home. Melissa watched the footage in silence. When it finished, she looked at me with something approaching hatred. You set me up, she said. I protected myself. I replied, there's a difference. Howard pulled out another document, Mrs. Pierce. You have two choices. You can leave this house immediately and never contact Mr. Pierce again, and we'll consider this matter closed. Or we can file formal charges for attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted forgery. Melissa looked around the room at all of us. Her shoulders sagged slightly. What about my things? My belongings you can pack what you brought with you, I said. Everything else stays here. She nodded slowly and went to the guest room. 20 minutes later, she emerged with her 2 suitcases. At the front door, she turned back to me. 20 years, Alan. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of you waiting for me to get old and vulnerable enough to steal from, I replied. How long were you planning this? She didn't answer, just walked out to her car and drove away. The next week, Howard helped me update my will. 90% of my estate would go to a scholarship fund I was establishing for kids from working-class families who wanted to learn construction trades. The remaining 10% would go to my daughter Linda, who'd been the real target of Melissa's scheme all along. A month later, Diane Roberts called with news. The Vermont State Police had arrested Melissa for trying the same scam on an 81-year-old widower named George Fletcher in Montpelier. Apparently, I wasn't her first target, and I wouldn't have been her last. She was convicted on multiple counts of elder fraud and sentenced to 4 years in prison. As for me, I'm still here in my mountain cabin, still fishing the local streams, still reading in my workshop. Linda and I talk every week now. Kenneth comes up sometimes to help with repairs around the place. The difference is now I know the value of paying attention to what's right in front of you. Sometimes the biggest threats come from the people closest to us. But if you keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to ask for help, you can protect yourself. Even at 62, even when people think you're an easy target, you can still fight back. And sometimes if you're smart about it, you can win. Trust is earned over decades, but it only takes one recording to reveal who someone really is. The best defense against a predator isn't your age or your wealth. It's your willingness to document the truth. Sometimes protecting yourself means accepting that the person sleeping next to you has been planning to destroy you. Elder fraud doesn't happen because we're weak. It happens because we trust the wrong people with our strength. When someone tells you that you're confused, make sure you're the one with the recording device running.